"We don't want your money, sir. Just a loaf of bread. If we sing, will you let us eat?" That's what 10-year-old Mia asked, standing on the stage of the Williams Theater, her voice cutting through the elegant chatter of the city's wealthiest patrons moments before the Winter Gala performance. Her desperate words made the diamond-draped audience erupt in cruel laughter, pointing at her and her twin sister Maya as if they were part of some twisted street theater. But when the theater staff let the girls approach the grand piano, just to humiliate them further in front of everyone, the twins opened their mouths and began to sing, and the entire theater fell into a silence so deep you could hear hearts breaking. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe. Also, we'd love to know, have you ever seen someone in desperate need and felt frozen, unsure how to help? Tell us in the comments what small act of kindness you've done this week. We want to hear from you. The cold was merciless that January night, biting through the city like a living thing that fed on suffering. Everything around the Williams Theater seemed wrapped in a darkness that swallowed hope whole. But despite the freezing rain that turned the streets into rivers of ice, despite the way her own body trembled with hunger and exhaustion, Mia gathered what remained of her courage, barely a whisper of strength, and turned to her twin sister with a voice that cracked and broke like fragile glass. "Maya, we have to try. We have to go inside," Mia said, with each word visible as white breath that vanished into the frozen air before it could carry any real warmth. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was deadly, turning the two sisters into shivering shadows on the edge of disappearing completely. Raindrops, half-frozen, sharp as needles, clung to the girls' matted hair, streaming down their hollow cheeks and dripping from their chins. Their clothes, soaked through hours ago, hung on their bodies like heavy, wet shrouds, making them appear even smaller than their malnourished frames already were. Maya was shaking so violently it looked like her bones might shatter. Her lips had turned a terrifying shade of blue-purple, the color of frostbite creeping in. "Mia, I can't feel my fingers anymore," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. She wrapped her thin arms around herself in a futile attempt to trap heat that wasn't there. "Everything hurts. I'm so hungry it feels like I'm being eaten from the inside out." Mia, older by only 10 minutes but carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, squeezed her sister's ice-cold hand as tightly as she could. She tried to push warmth through that touch, tried to transfer courage and hope from her heart into Maya's failing body. But the brutal truth was that she had almost nothing left to give. Her own reserves were nearly empty. "Please, Maya, stay with me. Don't close your eyes," Mia begged, her voice breaking as she stared at the glowing entrance of the Williams Theater. Through the rain-streaked glass doors, she could see them, the wealthy, the powerful, the people who lived in a world so far removed from hers they might as well be on another planet. Women in gowns that cost more than a year's rent, men in tailored suits, laughing easily, champagne glasses catching the light of crystal chandeliers. The warmth inside that building looked like salvation. But Mia knew what people like that thought of people like her and Maya. She'd seen it in their eyes 1,000 times, that look that said, "You're invisible, you don't matter, you're not even really human." Still, she had no choice. Maya's breathing was getting shallower. The blue tint on her lips was spreading. If they stayed out here one more hour, maybe even one more minute, Maya would... number. Mia refused to finish that thought. She pulled her sister closer, feeling how light Maya had become, how fragile, like a bird with broken wings. Around Maya's neck, barely visible beneath her tattered collar, hung a small silver locket, the only thing their mother had left them before she died. Inside it was a photo so faded you could barely make out the faces anymore, and a secret Mia didn't fully understand. "We're going in," Mia whispered, more to herself than to Maya, "and we're going to do what Mama taught us. We're going to sing." Maya's eyes, those beautiful eyes that used to sparkle with mischief and joy before hunger and cold had dulled them, met Mia's for just a moment, and in that look was a question neither of them wanted to ask out loud. What if singing isn't enough this time? The sisters stood at the edge of the light, two frozen ghosts about to step into a world of warmth and wealth that had never wanted them. Inside that theater, a man named Tony T. Williams was preparing to introduce the evening's star performers, completely unaware that his entire life was about to shatter and rebuild itself in the span of a single song. He had no idea that the two shivering girls outside his door were about to sing a melody he thought had died 10 years ago. He had no idea that the truth his family had buried was about to claw its way out of the grave. And he had no idea that by the time the night was over, he would finally hold his daughters in his arms, just in time to lose one of them forever. But that moment was still ahead of them, waiting like a tragedy that couldn't be stopped. First, Mia had to get through those doors. First, she had to survive the laughter. First, she had to find her voice. What happened when the girls finally stepped into that golden theater? Would anyone listen? Or would the cruelty of the crowd be the final blow that broke them both? It started with the color. Mia had been watching Maya's face for the last 20 minutes, trying to convince herself that the strange shade creeping across her sister's skin was just a trick of the streetlights, just shadows playing games in the rain. But when they passed under the bright glow of the theater's entrance, there was no denying it anymore. Maya's lips were blue, not the soft blue of a summer sky or the gentle blue of their mother's favorite scarf. This was the blue of something dying, the blue of flesh surrendering to cold. It started at the edges of Maya's mouth and bled inward, turning her lips into something that looked more like bruised fruit than living skin. Mia's heart dropped into her stomach like a stone thrown into deep water. "Maya," she whispered. Anna stopping abruptly on the sidewalk and grabbing her sister's face between both hands. Maya's skin felt like touching ice pulled straight from a freezer. "Maya, look at me!" But Maya's eyes were unfocused, glazed over with exhaustion, and something worse, resignation. Her pupils were dilated, swallowing up the warm brown that used to shine there. She swayed on her feet and Mia had to wrap an arm around her waist to keep her upright. This was hypothermia. Mia had seen it before, 3 winters ago, when an old man named Joseph who used to share his blanket with them had fallen asleep under the bridge and never woken up. His lips had looked exactly like this, blue, then purple, then gone. No, 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 Mia breathed, panic rising in her chest like floodwater. She looked around desperately, her mind racing through impossible calculations. The nearest shelter was 12 blocks away, and they'd already been turned away twice this week because it was over capacity. The church didn't open its doors until 6 in the morning, 5 hours from now. 5 hours Maya didn't have. Maya's knees buckled, and Mia caught her, both of them sinking toward the wet pavement. "I'm just so tired, Mia," Maya mumbled, her words slurring together. "Can we just rest for a minute? Just close our eyes." "No," Mia's voice came out sharp, almost violent. She shook her sister, probably harder than she should have, but terror made her rough. "You can't sleep, you hear me? You absolutely cannot sleep right now." She knew what happened when people with hypothermia fell asleep in the cold. She'd heard the stories whispered among the other street kids. Sleep was just another word for dying. Why, Mia's eyes snapped to the Williams Theater towering above them, its golden light spilling onto the rain-slicked streets like liquid warmth. She could see the people inside through the glass doors, women in silk gowns, men in tuxedos, all of them dry and warm and alive. The annual winter gala. She'd heard about it from other homeless folks who tried to beg outside the entrance before security chased them away. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, something Laura had told them during one of her rare lucid moments before the sickness took her. "Your father lives in a castle of music, my darlings. If you ever need him, follow the sound of pianos." Mia had never believed it. It sounded like one of Mama's fever dreams, the kind of pretty lie people told themselves when reality was too cruel to face. But standing here now, with Maya literally freezing to death in her arms, Mia didn't care if it was true or not. That building had heat, it had food, it had a chance. And Mia would do anything, beg, steal, humiliate herself in front of 1,000 cruel strangers to keep her sister breathing. "We're going inside," Mia said, her voice hardening into something she didn't recognize, something fierce and desperate and willing to burn the whole world down if it meant saving Maya. "Right now." She hoisted Maya up, supporting almost all of her sister's weight, and began dragging her toward the theater entrance. Maya's feet barely moved, leaving drag marks in the puddles. Behind them, the January night waited with open jaws. Ahead, through those glowing doors, their fate was already written in a song they didn't know would break their father's heart. Mia just had to get them through the door before Maya's eyes closed for the last time. The memory came to Mia unbidden as she half-carried Maya toward the theater doors, triggered by the distant sound of a piano warming up inside. Suddenly, she was 7 years old again, sitting on the floor of their tiny apartment, back when Mama was still alive, back when the world still made sense. Laura Simmons had been standing at the kitchen sink, washing their only 2 plates, humming a melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. The afternoon light had caught her dark hair, making it shine like the women in the magazines at the grocery store. She'd been beautiful then, before the sickness hollowed her out. "Mama, sing the lullaby," little Maya had begged, crawling into Laura's lap the moment she sat down. Mia had joined them, and their mother had wrapped both girls in her arms, Mia still smelling faintly of the lavender soap she used to stretch for weeks. And then Laura had sung. Her voice had been like nothing else in their world, rich and warm and impossibly pure, filling their cramped apartment with something that felt like magic. The melody was haunting, bittersweet, with words that sounded like they came from another language, though Mama always sang it in English. In the castle made of sound, where the music never dies, 2 little hearts beat together, underneath the starlit skies. Mia remembered thinking her mother's voice could heal anything, that it was a kind of superpower. "Where did you learn that song, Mama?" Mia had asked when the last note faded into silence. Laura's eyes had gone distant, the way they sometimes did when she was remembering things that hurt. "Your father taught it to me," she'd whispered, "back when we were in love, back when he still knew who I was." Maya had perked up at that. They almost never talked about their father. Where is Daddy?" Laura had been quiet for a long time, her fingers absently playing with the silver locket she always wore, the same locket that now hung around Maya's neck. When she finally spoke, her voice had been so soft they'd had to lean in close to hear. "Your father lives in a castle of music, my darlings, a place where people pay fortunes just to hear beautiful sounds. He owns it, or his family does, the Williams Theater." She'd said the name like it was something sacred and forbidden at the same time. "If you ever need him, if something happens to me, you follow the sound of pianos. You sing the lullaby. He'll know. He'll know who you are." "Why doesn't he come see us?" Mia had asked, child logic making it simple. The pain that had crossed Laura's face had been terrible to witness, even at 7 years old. "Because his family told him lies, baby. They said I ran away, that I didn't want him. They said—" Her voice had cracked. "They said terrible things about me, and he believed them. He never knew about you girls. He never knew I was carrying you when they forced me out." "But Mama, we could go tell him," Maya had insisted, always the optimistic one. "We could show him we're real." Laura had pulled them closer, so tight it almost hurt. "No, my loves. Promise me you'll only go if you absolutely have to. Promise me you'll stay far away from that place unless I'm gone, and you have nowhere else to turn. Those people, they're powerful. They're cruel. They'll eat little girls like you alive." Mia had promised. Maya had promised too. And then, 3 years later, Laura had died in a charity hospital bed, her beautiful voice reduced to rattling breaths, the lullaby dying on her lips. Now, standing in front of those golden doors with Maya barely conscious in her arms, Mia understood what her mother had meant. This wasn't just a theater. It was a fortress, a place where people like them didn't belong, but desperation made promises meaningless. "I'm sorry, Mama," Mia whispered to the ghost of her mother, tightening her grip on Maya. "I know you told us to stay away, but I'm out of choices." She could almost hear Laura's voice in the wind. "Then sing, baby. Sing like your life depends on it." Because it did. Mia took a deep breath, feeling the locket press against Maya's chest where it rested, and pushed open the door to her father's castle. The warmth hit her like a physical blow, and for just a moment, she forgot how to breathe. The warmth lasted exactly 3 seconds before a hand clamped down on Mia's shoulder and yanked her backward. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The security guard's voice was sharp as broken glass. He was massive, his tuxedo straining across his chest, and his face twisted with disgust as he looked at the two shivering girls. "This is a private event. Get out, now!" "Please," Mia gasped, her grip on Maya tightening. "My sister is sick. She just needs to warm up for a few minutes. We won't bother anyone." "I said out." He shoved her, not gently, back through the door and into the freezing rain. Mia stumbled, barely keeping Maya upright as they crashed into someone on the red carpet. A woman in a floor-length emerald gown shrieked and jumped back like they were diseased. "Oh my God, they touched me!" the woman screeched, and brushing frantically at her dress. "Security! These street rats are contaminating the guests!" A small crowd had gathered now, a circle of silk and diamonds and perfectly styled hair, all staring at the twins like they were insects that had crawled out of the gutter. Which, Mia supposed with bitter clarity, was exactly what they thought. "Someone call the police," a man in a top hat suggested, his nose wrinkled. "They're probably here to steal purses." "Look at them," another woman whispered, loud enough to be heard. "Absolutely filthy. This is what happens when the city doesn't clean up the homeless problem." Maya was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Mia tried to shield her from the stares, from the cruel words that cut deeper than the cold ever could. "We just need—" Mia started, but another security guard had arrived. This one, even larger than the first. "Move along before we have you arrested for trespassing," he growled. "This is your only warning." They were herded away from the entrance like stray dogs, the golden doors closing with a finality that felt like a death sentence. The crowd went back to their champagne and their laughter, already forgetting the two girls existed. Mia stood on the sidewalk, rain pouring down her face, and felt something inside her crack. Maya was barely standing now, her eyes rolling back, her breathing shallow and ragged. "No," Mia whispered fiercely. "No, I'm not giving up." She pulled Maya along the side of the building, away from the main entrance, searching desperately for any other way in. The theater was enormous, taking up an entire city block, its walls rising up like golden cliffs. Then she saw it. If at a service entrance around the back, where delivery trucks probably unloaded during the day. And next to it, half hidden behind stacked crates and garbage bins, a set of old cellar stairs leading down into darkness. The door at the bottom was ajar, propped open by a wooden wedge, probably left by some careless worker who'd gone in and forgotten to close it behind them. Mia didn't hesitate. She guided Maya down the narrow steps, their feet splashing through puddles of oily water. The cellar door groaned as she pushed it wider, revealing a dimly lit corridor that smelled of dust and old wood, and something else. The faint, beautiful sound of music drifting from somewhere above. They were in. The corridor was lined with old stage equipment, pieces of scenery, broken chairs, costumes hanging on racks like ghosts. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation. It was warmer here, blessedly warmer, though the air was thick and stale. Maya's legs gave out completely, and Mia lowered her gently to the concrete floor, propping her against the wall. "Just rest for a minute," Mia whispered, though her heart was screaming that they didn't have a minute. "Just catch your breath." Above them, the ceiling vibrated with footsteps, hundreds of them, the gala guests taking their seats, the orchestra preparing to play. Mia looked up at the ceiling, then down at her dying sister, then at the silver locket still hanging around Maya's neck. Somewhere up there was their father. Somewhere up there was Tony Williams, the man who didn't know they existed. And Mia was going to make damn sure he found out. She just had to figure out how to get Maya up those stairs and onto that stage before it was too late. Mia found a heating vent along the wall and positioned Maya against it, feeling the weak warmth radiating through the metal grate. Maya's eyes were closed, her breathing still too shallow, but at least she'd stopped shaking quite so violently. "Stay here," Mia whispered, though she knew Maya was too weak to go anywhere. "I need to see what's up there." She followed the sound of music up a narrow servant's staircase, her wet shoes squelching on each step. The stairs opened onto a backstage area, all black curtains and ropes and stage equipment. Mia pressed herself against the wall, invisible in the shadows, and peered out at the stage. The Williams Theater was breathtaking. Tiers of red velvet seats rose up like a golden canyon, filled with glittering people who sparkled under the massive chandeliers. The stage itself was enormous, dominated by a concert grand piano that gleamed like a black jewel under the spotlights. And at that piano sat a man who could only be Neil Townsend. Mia had heard his name whispered among the street musicians who sometimes played for coins near the park. They spoke of him with a mixture of awe and resentment, the pianist who never missed a note, who could play the most difficult pieces in the world without breaking a sweat, who made audiences weep with technical perfection. He was handsome in a cold, calculated way, his tuxedo tailored to impossible precision, his dark hair slicked back, his posture rigid and perfect. He didn't look at the audience before he began. He simply placed his fingers on the keys and started to play. The music that poured from the piano was flawless. Rachmaninoff, Mia thought, though she couldn't be sure. Something Russian and complex with cascading runs that sounded like diamonds falling downstairs. Neil's fingers moved with mechanical precision, hitting every note exactly right, the timing perfect, the dynamics textbook appropriate. The audience sat in respectful silence, nodding along, clearly impressed by the technical mastery on display. But Mia felt nothing. She watched Neil's face as he played, and it was completely blank. There was no joy there, no pain, no longing, no love. He was executing the piece like a surgeon performing a routine operation, competent, skilled, but utterly disconnected from what his hands were doing. The music was perfect and completely empty. When the final chord rang out, the audience erupted in polite applause. Neil stood, bowed with the same mechanical precision he'd used on the keys, and walked off stage with a satisfied smirk on his face. Mia heard him talking to someone in the wings, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Too easy. I could play that piece in my sleep. Did you see Madame Norma in the front row? I thought she was going to cry with jealousy." "Brilliant as always, Mr. Townsend," a stage manager said obsequiously. "Of course," Neil replied, as if any other outcome would have been impossible. Mia pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her mind racing. She thought about her mother singing, how Laura's voice had made their tiny apartment feel like a cathedral. She thought about the lullaby, the way it seemed to carry every ounce of love and loss and longing that had ever existed in the world. That's when she understood. These people didn't care about soul. They cared about spectacle, about technical perfection, about being impressed. But somewhere underneath all that wealth and polish, they were still human, still capable of feeling something real if you could cut through their armor. Maya and Mia had nothing, no training, no pedigree, no expensive instruments. But they had their mother's lullaby. They had voices that carried grief and hope and desperation, the kind of raw emotion these people had insulated themselves from. If Neil's perfection left them cold, maybe Mia and Maya's brokenness would make them feel something. It was a gamble, a terrible, desperate gamble, but it was the only currency they had. Mia turned and hurried back down to the cellar, where Maya was still slumped against the heating vent. She knelt down and took her sister's face in her hands. "Maya," she whispered urgently, "I know you're tired. I know you hurt, but I need you to wake up. I need you to sing with me, just one song. Can you do that?" Maya's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Sing. Mama's lullaby, the one about the castle. Can you remember it?" A ghost of a smile touched Maya's blue lips. "Always." Mia helped her sister to her feet, supporting almost all her weight. Together, they began climbing the stairs toward the stage, toward their father, toward whatever fate waited for two homeless girls, brave enough, or foolish enough, to interrupt a gala full of people who'd already decided they didn't matter. The stage lights hit Mia like a wall of fire. She'd been hidden in the shadows for so long that the sudden brightness was disorienting, nearly blinding. She could feel hundreds of eyes turning toward them, could hear the collective gasp that rippled through the audience like a wave. For a moment, everything stopped. Mia stood there in the center of the stage, supporting Maya's limp weight, both of them soaked and shivering and filthy. Under the unforgiving lights, they looked even worse than they had outside, their clothes torn and stained with mud, and worse, their hair matted into tangles, their faces hollow with hunger. They looked like ghosts, like street creatures who'd crawled up from the sewers. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then someone laughed. It started as a single snicker from somewhere in the third row, but it spread like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire theater was roaring with laughter, not polite chuckling, but the kind of cruel, vicious laughter that comes from people who found something so absurd, so beneath them, that mockery is the only possible response. "Oh my God!" a woman's voice shrieked from the wings. "How did they get in here?" Mia turned to see a woman emerging from backstage, draped in a gown that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. Her makeup was severe, her hair piled high in an elaborate style. This had to be Madame Norma, the opera diva whose face Mia had seen on posters outside. "Security!" Madame Norma's voice was shrill with outrage. "There are vagrants on my stage, filthy little street rats contaminating my performance." Neil Townsend appeared beside her. His perfect face twisted into an expression of theatrical disgust. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying easily across the theater. "It seems we have uninvited guests. Tell me, darlings, did you wander away from the garbage heap, or are you looking for the dog pound?" The audience roared with laughter again. Mia heard someone in the front row call out, "Throw them out," while another voice suggested, "Someone check the silverware count." Maya was trembling against Mia's side, not from cold now, but from humiliation. Mia could feel her sister trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear, but Mia tightened her grip and forced herself to stand taller. "Please," Mia said, her voice cracking but determined. "We just want to sing, just one song, for a loaf of bread." The laughter somehow got louder, more vicious. Did you hear that?" Neil said, turning to Madame Norma with exaggerated delight. "They want to sing. How absolutely precious. What do you think, Norma? Should we let the little street rats perform? It might be amusing." Madame Norma's smile was like a knife. "Oh, I think we absolutely should. After all, the audience paid for entertainment, and I can't imagine anything more entertaining than watching these creatures try to make music." She turned to the audience, playing to them like the performer she was. "Ladies and gentlemen, I propose we allow these unfortunate waifs to demonstrate their talents. Who knows? Perhaps they'll surprise us." Her tone made it clear she expected nothing but humiliation. The audience loved it. They clapped and cheered, settling back in their seats like spectators at a gladiatorial arena, eager to watch something get torn apart. A stagehand rolled the piano bench forward, and Neil gestured toward it with a mocking flourish. "By all means, darlings, show us what you've got. I'm sure it will be memorable." More laughter. Someone in the balcony shouted, "This is better than the opera." Mia helped Maya to the bench, her sister's hands shaking so badly she could barely lift them to the keys. Mia stood beside her, facing the audience of glittering predators, and felt her mother's locket pressing against Maya's chest. This was it. This was the moment everything would either change or end. She could see a man in the front row, older than the others, with silver hair and a face that looked carved from stone. He wasn't laughing. He was staring at them with an expression Mia couldn't quite read. Something between curiosity and pain. Mia didn't know it yet, but she was looking at Tony Williams. She didn't know that in 30 seconds, when they opened their mouths to sing, that man's entire world would shatter. She only knew that they had one chance, one song, one moment to prove they were more than street rats. Maya's fingers found the keys, and Mia began to sing. The first note that came from Maya's trembling fingers was wrong. Not technically wrong, but fragile. A single key pressed with so little strength it barely made a sound. The audience tittered, already preparing their next round of mockery. Then Mia opened her mouth and began to sing. "In the castle made of sound, where the music never dies." Her voice cracked on the first word, raw and untrained and breaking with exhaustion. But there was something in it, something that cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. The melody was simple, almost childlike, but it carried a weight that no technical perfection could match. Maya's fingers found their rhythm, and the piano began to speak. Not with Neil's mechanical precision, but with something far more dangerous: emotion. Each note trembled with the same fragility as the girls themselves, as if the piano was crying. Two little hearts beat together underneath the starlit skies. Mia's voice grew stronger, not in volume, but in presence. She wasn't performing, she was surviving. Every word was a prayer, a plea, a promise. This wasn't a song anymore. It was a confession, a eulogy for their mother, a desperate cry into the void. The laughter died. One by one, the smirks fell from the faces in the audience like masks being removed. A woman in the second row touched her hand to her throat. A man in the balcony leaned forward, his champagne glass forgotten. Even Madame Norma's cruel smile had frozen, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. Scientists have discovered that music activates the brain's mirror neurons, the same neural pathways that allow us to feel empathy for others. When we hear genuine emotion in someone's voice, our brains don't just process it as sound. They experience it as if it were our own feeling. The human brain cannot distinguish between real suffering and suffering expressed through music. It responds the same way to both. And what Mia and Maya were singing was the purest form of suffering these people had ever heard. Where the lost ones find their way, and the broken learn to fly, in the castle made of sound, where love will never die. Maya's voice joined Mia's on the chorus, weak and fractured, but heartbreakingly beautiful. The sisters' voices intertwined like two threads of the same fraying rope, holding each other up even as they both threatened to break. The theater had gone completely silent, not the polite silence of an attentive audience, but the stunned silence of people who've just witnessed something they can't explain. Some unspoken truth had invaded the room, stripping away the pretense and the wealth and the carefully constructed distance these people maintained from the world's ugliness. A woman 3 rows back was crying. Actually crying, tears streaming down her powdered cheeks. In the front row, Tony Williams had gone absolutely still. His hands gripped the armrests of his seat so tightly his knuckles had turned white, his face had drained of all color, and his lips were moving silently, forming the words along with the girls. He knew this song. "Mama, can you hear us up among the stars? Daddy? Gee, do you know we're here, bearing all these scars?" The final verse wasn't part of the original lullaby. Laura had added it in those last fevered weeks before she died, singing it to her daughters as if she could somehow send a message through time and space to the man who'd never known they existed. Maya's hand slipped from the keys, too weak to continue. The final notes hung in the air like smoke, slowly dissipating into a silence so profound, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Mia stood there, exposed and vulnerable under the lights, Maya slumped against her side. She looked out at the sea of faces, all of them staring, some tear-streaked, some shocked, all of them finally seeing the 2 homeless girls as human beings. Neil Townsend looked like he'd been slapped. Madame Norma's hand was pressed against her chest, her breath coming in short gasps. And Tony Williams stood up. He rose from his seat slowly, like a man in a dream or a nightmare, his eyes locked on the girls with an expression of absolute horror and recognition. His hand reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, yellowed and worn from being carried for years. He looked at the photograph, he looked at the girls, and then he whispered 2 words that changed everything. "My daughters." The theater erupted. Tony Williams moved through the theater like a man possessed, pushing past gala guests who tried to grab his arm, ignoring the chaos erupting around him. His eyes never left the 2 girls on the stage, the girls who'd just sung a song only 3 people in the world had ever known. Himself, Laura Simmons, and apparently these children. The stage stairs seemed to stretch forever, but then he was there, standing in the lights, close enough to see every detail he'd missed from his seat, close enough to see that these weren't just any homeless children. They looked like Laura. The resemblance was so striking it physically hurt to witness. The older girl had Laura's bone structure, that same defiant tilt to her chin even in the midst of absolute terror. The younger one had Laura's eyes, those deep brown eyes that had haunted Tony's dreams for 10 years. "Who?" Tony's voice broke. He tried again. "Who taught you that song?" The older girl, Mia, though he didn't know her name yet, lifted her chin higher, protective instinct making her step slightly in front of her sister. "Our mother, Laura Simmons." The name hit Tony like a physical blow. He actually staggered, and someone in the audience gasped. Behind him, he could hear Neil Townsend saying something, but the words were just noise. Everything was noise except for the sound of his own heart shattering. "Laura," he whispered. "Where is she? Where's Laura?" He saw the answer in Mia's eyes before she spoke, saw the grief that was too deep, too permanent to be anything but final. "She died 3 years ago. Oh, in a charity hospital." Mia's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "She said you were our father. She said your family lied to you, told you she ran away." Tony couldn't breathe. The world was tilting, reality rearranging itself into a shape he didn't recognize. "I looked for her," he heard himself say. "For months I looked. They told me she'd left with someone else, that she wanted nothing to do with me. My mother showed me bank statements, said Laura had taken money and disappeared. I believed." His voice cracked. "God help me, I believed them." Then his eyes fell on the locket. It was hanging around the younger girl's neck, partially hidden beneath her filthy collar, but the silver caught the light, and Tony's breath stopped completely. He knew that locket. He'd bought it in a tiny jewelry shop in Paris, back when he and Laura were still students, back when they were young and in love, and the world seemed full of infinite possibility. He'd had it engraved. 2 words. A promise. "May I?" Tony asked, his hand trembling as he reached toward Maya. Maya looked at Mia, who nodded slowly. Tony lifted the locket with shaking fingers, turning it over to read the inscription he'd written 13 years ago. "Forever, Tony." The sob that tore from his chest was animal, primal. He'd given this to Laura the night he'd proposed, the night she'd said yes. The night before, his family had torn them apart with their lies and their cruelty and their absolute conviction that a girl from the wrong side of town wasn't good enough for a Williams. "You're my daughters," Tony said, and it wasn't a question anymore. It was a fact that rewrote his entire existence. You're my daughters, and I never knew. She was pregnant, and I never knew. She was sick and dying, and I never—" He couldn't finish. He pulled both girls into his arms, not caring that they were wet and dirty, not caring that he was ruining his tuxedo, not caring about anything except that he was holding his children for the first time, and it was 10 years too late. Mia stood rigid in his embrace, clearly unused to being touched with anything resembling gentleness. But Maya melted against him, her small body shaking with exhaustion and relief, and something that might have been hope. "I'm so sorry," Tony whispered into their hair. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm so sorry you had to live like this. I'm so—" Maya coughed, a wet, rattling cough that sent ice through Tony's veins. He pulled back and really looked at her for the first time, and saw the blue tint to her lips, the glazed fever in her eyes, the way she was struggling to breathe. "She needs a doctor," Mia said urgently. "Right now. She has pneumonia, I think, and she's been in the cold too long, and—" Tony was already moving, scooping Maya into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, this daughter he'd never known, this child who should have grown up in his home instead of on the streets. "Someone call an ambulance!" he roared. "Now!" The theater finally snapped into action around him, but Tony barely noticed. He was staring down at Maya's face, watching her eyes flutter closed and praying to a god he'd stopped believing in years ago. Please, please don't let me lose her now, not when I just found her. The ambulance was on its way, but the seconds felt like hours. Tony held Maya against his chest, feeling her labored breathing, while Mia stood beside him looking lost and overwhelmed. The audience had erupted into chaos, some people crying, others shouting questions, everyone trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. That's when Neil Townsend made his fatal mistake. "Mr. Williams," he said, stepping forward with that same arrogant smile he'd worn all evening. "Sir, I'm sure this is all very touching, but we do have a performance to complete. Perhaps we could have security escort these— we could move them backstage until the medical personnel arrive. The guests paid quite a lot for tonight's gala," and Tony's head snapped up and the look in his eyes made Neil physically recoil. "You laughed at them," Tony said, his voice so quiet it was terrifying. "You stood on my stage in my theater and you called my daughters street rats." The color drained from Neil's face. "I didn't know—" "You didn't care." Tony's roar echoed through the theater, silencing every conversation. "You saw 2 starving children asking for bread and you turned them into a spectacle. You mocked them. You encouraged an entire audience to humiliate them for your entertainment." Madame Norma stepped forward, her hands fluttering. "Mr. Williams, surely you understand we had no way of knowing they were— It shouldn't have mattered who they were." Tony cut her off, his fury barely controlled. He carefully shifted Maya in his arms, making sure she was secure, before turning the full force of his rage on the 2 performers. "They were children, sick, hungry children asking for help. And your first instinct was cruelty." "The boy has a point, though," someone in the audience muttered. "We didn't know." Tony wheeled on the crowd, and his voice carried with it every ounce of authority that came from owning the most prestigious theater in the city. "Every single one of you should be ashamed. You sat there in your diamonds and your designer clothes, and you laughed at 2 children who were literally freezing to death. You saw them as entertainment, as something less than human." The silence that followed was suffocating. Several audience members looked down at their laps, shame finally catching up with them. Tony turned back to Neil and Madame Norma. "You're fired. Both of you. Effective immediately. I never want to see either of your faces again." Neil's mouth dropped open. "You can't. I have a contract." "Sue me," Tony said coldly. "I'll tie you up in legal battles for the next decade and destroy your reputation in every major city in the world. Or you can leave quietly right now and hope I don't tell every artistic director from here to Vienna exactly what kind of people you are." Madame Norma's face had turned an ugly shade of purple. "This is ridiculous. Over 2 street urchins? Tony, be reasonable." "Get out!" Tony's voice cracked like thunder. "Get out of my theater before I have you thrown out." Security appeared, and this time they weren't escorting the girls. They were surrounding Neil and Madame Norma, who were hustled off the stage amid their protests and the stunned silence of the audience. When they were gone, Tony's fury seemed to collapse in on itself, replaced by something that looked like absolute despair. He sank down onto the piano bench, still holding Maya, and looked up at Mia with eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and the words broke. "I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have had to come here like this. You shouldn't have had to beg. You should have been raised in my home, in warmth and safety, with everything you needed. You should have known your father." Mia stared at him. This stranger who claimed to be her father, this man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She'd dreamed of this moment so many times, imagined what it would be like to finally meet the father her mother had loved, but she'd never imagined it would feel like this, like grief and relief and anger and hope all tangled together. "Our mother loved you," Mia said finally, her voice small. She never stopped. Even when she was dying, she told us you were a good man, that you'd been lied to. Tony's hand reached for hers, trembling. She was right. I was. But that doesn't excuse what happened to you. Nothing excuses that. In his arms, Maya stirred slightly, her eyes opening just a crack. Daddy? She whispered, the word barely audible. Tony's face crumpled completely. Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm right here. We're not hungry anymore, Maya murmured, a small smile touching her blue lips. And Tony realized with absolute horror that she thought she was dying, that she was saying goodbye. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes, but they were the longest 4 minutes of Tony Williams's life. The paramedics worked quickly, wrapping Maya in thermal blankets, starting an IV, their faces professionally neutral, but their eyes telling a story Tony didn't want to read. Severe hypothermia, one of them said quietly. Pneumonia, malnutrition, possible sepsis. We need to get her to the hospital now. I'm coming with you, Tony said, and it wasn't a request. Mia climbed into the ambulance beside him, her hand gripping Maya's with a desperation that broke Tony's heart all over again. The ride was a blur of sirens and medical jargon and Maya's shallow breathing. At the hospital, the doctors worked for 3 hours. They pumped her full of antibiotics, warmed her core temperature degree by degree. All hooked her to machines that beeped and hummed. And slowly, miraculously, Maya stabilized. She's strong, the doctor told Tony as dawn broke outside the hospital windows. Stronger than she has any right to be. But Mr. Williams, I need you to understand, the damage from prolonged exposure and malnutrition doesn't just disappear. Her immune system is severely compromised. The pneumonia is aggressive. We're doing everything we can, but he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Tony brought his daughters home 2 days later, not to the hospital, which Maya had begged to leave, but to the Williams estate, a sprawling mansion that suddenly felt obscenely large and empty. He'd had a bedroom prepared, filled with soft blankets and gentle light, with the best medical equipment money could buy set up discreetly in the corners. Maya's eyes had gone wide when she saw it. Is this really ours? She'd whispered. It's yours, Tony had said, his voice thick. It was always supposed to be yours. For 3 beautiful days, Tony got to be a father. He read to his daughters, learned that Mia loved mystery novels, and Maya adored anything with horses. He discovered that they both had their mother's laugh, that they finished each other's sentences, that they developed a language of looks and gestures from years of having only each other. He hired the best doctors, who came and went with increasingly worried expressions. He held Maya's hand while she slept, memorizing every detail of her face, trying to make up for 10 lost years and whatever time remained. On the 4th night, Maya woke up lucid and smiling. The fever had broken, and for a moment, Tony let himself hope. Daddy, she said, and the word still made his heart stop. This room is so warm. I can't remember ever being this warm. Tony sat on the edge of her bed, Mia curled up on the other side. You'll never be cold again, he promised. I swear it. Maya's smile was radiant. She looked around the room, at the soft curtains, the paintings on the walls, the lamp that cast everything in golden light. It's like the castle in Mama's song, she said softly, the castle made of sound. It's your castle now, Tony said, tears streaming down his face, yours and Mia's, forever. I'm not hungry anymore, Maya whispered, echoing the words she'd said on the stage, but this time her voice was peaceful, content. I'm warm and I'm full, and I'm home. Her eyes drifted closed, not with the desperate exhaustion of hypothermia, but with something that looked almost like peace. Maya? Mia's voice cracked. Maya, stay with me, please. We made it. We're safe now. You have to stay. But Maya's breathing had changed, slowed. The monitors began to beep in patterns that made the night nurse rush in, made doctors appear with crash cards and urgent voices. Tony pulled Mia back, holding her while she screamed, while the medical team worked frantically, while Maya slipped away despite every effort, every prayer, every desperate bargain offered to an uncaring universe. She died at 3:47 a.m., in a warm bed in her father's home, having known for just 4 days what it felt like to be loved and safe. 3 weeks later, Tony Williams stood at a press conference, Mia beside him, and announced the Laura and Maya Simmons Foundation. Every penny of his personal fortune, hundreds of millions, would go toward housing, feeding, and protecting homeless children. My daughter Maya lived 10 years on the streets because of my family's lies and my own blindness, he said, his voice steady despite the grief that would never fully heal. She died because I found her too late, but I will spend the rest of my life making sure no other child suffers the way my daughters did. This is my vow. This is Maya's legacy. Mia squeezed his hand. In the audience, former gala attendees wept with guilt they could never wash clean. And somewhere, Tony hoped, Laura and Maya were together again, singing their lullaby in a castle where the music truly never died. The end. Before you click away from this video, I need you to do something for me. Look at the screen you're watching this on. Look at the roof over your head. Feel the temperature of the room you're sitting in right now. Comfortable, warm, safe. Maya died after only 4 days of feeling what you feel every single day without even thinking about it. 4 days. She spent 10 years freezing, starving, invisible to people who walked past her every single day. People who had everything. People who could have helped with pocket change. People who chose not to see her. People exactly like the ones in that theater. People maybe exactly like you. Right now, as you're watching this, there's a child sleeping on a cold sidewalk. There's a little girl who hasn't eaten in 2 days. There's a boy who's sick and scared and wondering if anyone in the world cares whether he lives or dies. And here's the truth that should keep you up at night. You have the power to change that. Not Tony Williams, not some billionaire, not the government, you. The cost of your daily coffee could feed a homeless child for a day. The price of that shirt you bought and never wore could provide warm blankets. That subscription you forgot you're even paying for could fund a shelter bed. So here's what I'm asking you to do, and I'm asking because Maya can't. 1. Like this video. Not because I need the algorithm boost, but because every like spreads this story to someone else who needs to hear it. Someone who needs to feel what you're feeling right now. Guilt is useless unless it leads to action. 2. Share this video. Send it to that friend who complains about wanting to make a difference, but never does anything. Post it on your social media. Make people uncomfortable. Maya died because people were too comfortable to care. 3. Comment below and tell me, what are you going to do differently tomorrow? Are you going to walk past that homeless person again, or are you going to stop? Are you going to donate to a shelter, volunteer at a food bank, buy a meal for someone who's hungry? Tell me. Make a public commitment, because when you write it down, you're more likely to actually do it. And if you're sitting there thinking, this is just a story, it's not real, you're right. Mia and Maya aren't real. But the 1.6 million homeless children in America are. But the 150 million homeless children worldwide are. But the kid who's going to die tonight from hypothermia while you sleep in your warm bed is. This story is fiction. The suffering is not. You have 2 choices right now. Choice 1. Close this video, feel sad for 30 seconds, then scroll to the next piece of content and forget this ever happened. Go back to your comfortable life. Ignore the voice in your head telling you that you could do something. Become exactly like the people in that theater who laughed. Choice 2. Let this wreck you. Let the guilt turn into action. Find a homeless shelter in your city and ask what they need. Download an app that lets you donate to homeless youth programs. Next time you see someone asking for help, stop. Look them in the eye. See them as human. Give them your time, your money, your dignity. Choose to be the person who would have saved Maya. Maya died because people waited too long to care. How many more children are going to die while you're deciding whether or not to care? Don't just watch this story. Don't just feel sad. Do something. Like this video. Share it. Comment your commitment. And then, actually follow through. Because somewhere right now there's a child who's running out of time. And you might be their only chance. Don't let them become another Maya.